Welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Mick West. My guest today is Mike. Mike is a member of the 9/11 Truth community from New York, and we're going to talk about his involvement in that community. And so welcome to Tales from the Rabbit Hole, Mike.
Thanks, Mick. Thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Okay. Now, is there something you wanted to do before we got started?
Sure, yeah. I just wanted to have a very quick moment of silence for the victims of 9/11 because I think it's really important to keep that in mind as we have these discussions. And that includes all the people killed that day. It includes the even more people that have died from breathing in the dust at Ground Zero. And it includes all the people killed in the 9/11 wars, both Americans and non-Americans. All right. Thank you, Mick.
All right. Well, thank you for that, and thank you for being here. Now, you emailed me a few days ago, and you basically told me that you'd kind of seen some of my stuff on the internet, and you kind of found some of it interesting, and obviously you disagree with some of it, but then again, you probably agree with some bits here and there. Can you say like how you got into the 9/11 Truth movement?
Sure. I believe the official story for about 10 years, and a friend of mine nagged and nagged and nagged and nagged me for 3 years to watch the film Zeitgeist, the movie. And I was actually more interested initially in the part about Jesus not existing than I was in the 9/11 piece. I'm an atheist, and that was the topic that I was already interested in. I actually read a book called The Jesus Mysteries, which was very, very similar to what was expressed in the film. I still don't know what's really the most historically accurate thing about that, but it was interesting to me anyway. And the 9/11 piece of that film, it didn't convince me of anything right away, but it just kind of got me thinking, like, wow, this is pretty interesting. I never heard of most of the things they talk about in that film, and I just started doing research. So
Did you immediately start like reading or looking at other things after that, or was it just kind of just Zeitgeist for a while and you were focused on that, or was it like an immediate springboard to other things?
I don't know if it was immediate, but it was pretty quick. I would say within a few months, I was already trying to find the reports and trying to read up on some of that stuff. Loose change was another big one, and it's funny because you've talked with some other people in the movement before whose views have evolved and changed over time, and I'm no different. And, at first, honestly, I have to admit, at first I was kind of getting sucked into some of this nonsense that's in Loose Change. And after doing some research and listening to some other people, I was like, these Loose Change films, they have a lot of mistakes in them, especially the early ones. You got to really be careful. I say this all the time to people. When you're in the 9/11 Truth movement, you're surrounded by BS from all sides because you got the official BS and then the so-called 9/11 Truth BS.
So how do you go about deciding what's BS and what isn't BS then? If you've got BS on all sides, you can't say because it's on one side or the other it's BS. You have to look at the thing itself and decide. So what do you actually do when you're trying to decide whether something is BS or not?
Part of the answer to that is I'm not always completely sure, but what I try to do is I try to listen to experts on both sides and then use my own intelligence to see which one of those things seems more plausible based on either common sense or what I know about science, which isn't a tremendous amount. And I try to keep my mind open to always accepting new information because I might, I'm sure you know that the human mind is notoriously terrible at physics. Things seem intuitive to you and they make sense, but if you do the calculations, you're completely wrong. So I try to always keep an open mind and try not to use intuition too much because intuitive thinking is not scientific thinking.
Yeah. You know that the mind can play tricks on you and that physics is not something that you can intuit all the time. And yet you also say you use common sense. And this is something I hear a lot of people say. They say it's just common sense that the towers couldn't have collapsed in that way. Do you think there's like a bit of a conflict there in what you're saying, in that like common sense in a way is intuition?
Yeah, I suppose it could be, Mick. Yeah, I didn't realize that, but that is kind of a contradiction. Yeah.
You're like a member of the 9/11 truth community, and I guess you have been for quite a while. You said you started doing this like about 10 years ago. What was like the first experience you had with kind of like organized, the community, the 9/11 community?
Probably the event Justice in Focus in New York City in 2016, which is the event that produced the 9/11 Truth Action Project and the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry.
Yeah.
I had already been researching the stuff for a while by then, but I think that was my first real formal, gathering.
Was that the Architects and Engineers organized that one?
Yeah, it was AE and it was the Lawyers Committee also.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they basically got a bunch of people up on stage and people gave like various presentations. It was almost like kind of like a mock trial in a way, wasn't it? As I remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like they were calling all these witnesses for the prosecution. A bit one-sided, you could say, if it was an actual trial, in that they were calling people up who all believed that 9/11 was an inside job.
Yeah, yeah, that was my first organized event. I also wanted to mention, I mentioned to you before that I work for a crisis hotline,
mm-hmm.
and actually 9/11 is part of what made our place of work what it is today, because the hotline started in 1995, and it was 6 counselors at one table with 6 phones, and every call that came in, all 6 phones would ring, and people would just have an honor system as to who would take the next call, and the resource directory that they referred people to services was a paper listing of clinics alphabetically.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to 9/11. Obviously, there was a great need in the city for mental health and substance use help following the attacks, and we got a huge grant and expanded greatly. Today, we have over 100 counselors. We have a very elaborate, sophisticated queue system that distributes the calls. I manage the directory. It's no longer a paper directory. It's a, online directory.
Right.
And so that influenced me as well.
Were you working there the whole time?
No, I started there in 2010.
Which is, around the same time that you got interested in 9/11 truth. Is that kind of a coincidence, or was that just the type of thing that was like change happening in your life at the time?
No, I think that was just a coincidence.
Right.
Because my friend had been bugging me to watch that film already for like 3 years.
So your friend, out of interest, like, is he still your friend? Does he still have the same beliefs?
Oh, yeah.
Is he a member of the community?
No, he doesn't really get active in it. I mean, he just has his own views on the side, but he's not an organizer. He doesn't join groups or anything like that.
Have his opinions about 9/11 changed over the years?
I don't think so, actually. I think mine have more than his.
Interesting.
Yeah. And actually, what's interesting, too, is I'm not sure how familiar you are with the Zeitgeist film series, but there are 2 other films that came after that have nothing to do with 9/11, that have to do with the Zeitgeist movement. And I actually got pretty heavily involved in that for a while. And I still believe in the ideology, but I kind of gave up on trying to convince people of it.
So what is the Zeitgeist ideology?
The Zeitgeist ideology is apolitical. It is the view that instead of making decisions about society based on politics, which is someone's opinion, it should be based on science and research and facts. The current paradigm is kind of, uses money. The Zeitgeist ideology proposes the end of money, which is a lofty goal, I know. But it's achieved through technology, using technology to produce goods, to relieve people of labor, basically. It's been summarized as the application of the scientific method towards social concern. That's sort of the gist of it.
So who would get to decide it, though?
What do you mean?
Like, you say you would use science to decide, like, where things go and who gets what and things like that. But how would that actually work in practice, though? Would there be somebody, like a bunch of scientists, like, making decisions?
It's supposed to be a horizontal movement in which you don't really have a hierarchy. I don't know to the extent that that's really possible, but I found that there are a lot of questions like that about the movement and problems and things that need to be worked out. But it's more the overall approach and overall philosophy and view that I subscribe to. Just the philosophy of providing for human needs over money is very appealing to me.
Yeah, it sounds great, but I think it's one of those things that people will say, well, communism sounded great too, because communism is about to each according to his needs and stuff like that. but then in practice, it didn't work out very well in the various implementations. But I think, the big problem with all these political systems is how do they work in practice?
Yeah, because there's the theory and there's the practice, right?
Indeed, yeah. Getting back to 9/11, though, like you're a member of the 9/11 Truth Action Project, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. What do you do something there in particular?
Yeah, I'm a coordinator of the New York City chapter, actually.
And is that like kind of organizing meetings and things like that?
Yeah.
How many people do you have at those meetings?
Oh, it's been dismal recently. 2, 3, 4.
Really?
But the last meeting we had about 15, because what happened was we did an event in All Souls Church in New York City, which featured a bunch of speakers from the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. There was also that Asgard Snyder. He was invited to present his paper at a very prestigious engineering conference in New York, but the U.S. government actually denied his visa.
Wow.
So he Skyped into our event, gave a little talk. We had some first responders as well. We had Christopher Joya, I'm sure you heard of Chris Joya, the fire commissioner.
Yeah, he's like a local fire commissioner at one of the New York fire departments.
Nassau County,
yeah,
Long Island.
Okay.
So what happens? We had this event there, and it was very well attended. We had approximately 300 people there. It was kind of standing room only.
All right.
And I helped organize that event actually. And we had over 100 people sign up to want to be part of the Truth Action Project. So we contacted a bunch of those people, and in our last meeting, some of them showed up. One guy came from Rhode Island just to come to the meeting. It was probably the best meeting we've had in a long time, even though there were only 10 to 15 people. That's a big turnout for us, actually.
Right. Yeah. I was kind of surprised it was so small, like especially in New York.
Well, in New York, as you could imagine, it's an extremely touchy subject in New York, and people have very, very strong feelings about it on both sides. I find it hard. To talk to people about 9/11 in New York because of that emotional connection. I'm a little bit more removed from it because although I'm from New York, born and raised, I actually wasn't living here at the time of 9/11, and I didn't lose anybody in 9/11 that was close to me. The only person I lost was a casual acquaintance who was on one of the planes, actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know anybody. I was in LA at the time, and I remember there was people from the office at work who were supposed to be in the World Trade Center that day, but it was like their meeting was later in the day, so they didn't show up. So that was kind of like the closest that I came to any kind of personal connection, is like just knowing people who kind of had a near miss, and then just talking to people who were there. When they came back, obviously they were stuck in New York for a few days because of the air traffic shutdown, and then they came back a few days later and told people about what had transpired, how they got stuck, and how they were going to be there, and their little personal stories of the chaos and everything. It's interesting, the sides of the community. I don't want to try to be I don't want to come across as I'm trying to belittle it, but it is interesting that there isn't that much public involvement when you look at the surveys of people. Like if you do surveys of American people and ask do you think there should be another 9/11 investigation or things like that, you usually get quite a chunk of people. Or do you think the American government is telling us everything about 9/11? You'll get like a very large percentage of people, not a majority, but still quite a lot. But then you get these meetings where you only get handfuls of people showing up. And it seems like people have these ideas, but it doesn't translate into action.
Yeah, it's kind of like my friend who got me to watch Zeitgeist. He's never done anything towards the movement, to my knowledge. That's kind of what you and I were talking about the other day, where the difference between a cause and a hobby. Some people treat 9/11 as a hobby, kind of like people who read Civil War books and go to Civil War reenactments and stuff. It's like a hobby for them. They think this is really cool for some reason. And people are like that with 9/11. I don't approach it that way. To me, it's too important to just say my hobby is reading about 9/11. I want to translate it into some kind of action.
Yeah, no, I can tell it's very important to you, having the moment of silence there. And I imagine because you get in the crisis hotline, and would you talk to people who 9/11 is a big part of why they're calling or where they are
Yeah.
in their life.
Yeah, actually, there was I remember taking a call from a woman once who was, for lack of a better word, freaking out about 9/11 and saying, like, I can't walk down the street and see Muslim people with their garb. It makes me get PTSD and I'm afraid, and it's unfortunate. This is really interesting too. Obviously, I'm not going to name any names. The hotline is confidential, but we had a gentleman who used to call every day.
Wow.
And as soon as you pick up the phone, he would just say, 9/11 was an inside job, and he'd start ranting and raving about it. I spoke to him a number of times, and this was not planned or arranged, but I went to that event at Cooper Union that we talked about a few minutes ago, and after the fact, he called the hotline again and told me that he was there and told me, yeah, I was the guy with the black plastic bag putting all the DVDs in it. I'm like, oh, wow, I actually saw the guy buying DVDs and books and actually kind of being annoying, making kind of a ruckus with the bag, and they had to ask him to be quiet.
Huh. Yeah, well, I imagine you get all different types of people there.
We get all kinds of people. Nick, I'll be honest with you. I don't say this to be a jerk, but I actually dislike a large percentage of the people that I meet in the 9/11 truth movement, to be honest. Not all of them. I mean, I've met some really great, level-headed, intelligent people, but I've also met a lot of people who just latch on to anything they hear on any of these films or whatever and just take it as dogma and get belligerent when you try to argue with them about it. We have one guy who comes to our meetings sometimes, and he's a no-planer, which I'm not. And one day he was telling me it's physically impossible for a plane to penetrate the World Trade Center. And all I said to him was, okay, well, can you show me some calculations to substantiate that claim? And he just got really belligerent and started yelling at me, and what is that? Come on.
Yeah, I think that's like kind of what we were saying earlier with common sense. Like some people think that it's obvious that a plane couldn't penetrate the World Trade Center because they think the outside was made of steel and the plane was made of aluminum, and aluminum is softer than steel, therefore it couldn't go through the steel.
Well, there's this little thing called velocity. Nick, a paint chip can crack a windshield if it's moving fast enough.
Yeah, the example I often give is the ping pong ball. Mm-hmm. If you shoot a ping pong ball fast enough, it will go through a ping pong paddle. When obviously a ping pong paddle is designed very much to not have ping pong balls go through it, and it's obviously 1,000 times stronger than a ping pong ball. But if you shoot a ping pong ball at supersonic speed, it will blow a neat little hole into the ping pong paddle.
What's the formula? Force equals mass times acceleration?
Yeah,
like that?
F equals ma, but it's more about kinetic energy. Like the energy is proportional to the mass times the square of the velocity. So if you go twice as fast, you've got 4 times as much energy. And when something hits something, that energy has to go somewhere. So a plane that weighs 400 tons going at like 400 to 500 miles an hour has a vast amount of energy, and when it hits the side of the building, the energy has to go somewhere. Yeah, I think people, they do the common sense thing, and they say it's obvious that this couldn't happen. It looks like it just looks ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense to physics, but they don't go beyond the base level. They just take that first thing, and then they stop at that point. And then if you try to raise more objections to their argument or show them something else, they just reject it because they've already arrived at the conclusion and they don't feel any need to go any further. So it makes it very, very difficult to communicate.
It's frustrating. It's frustrating even for me, and I'm part of the movement. So I can't stand dealing with people like that. It's infuriating. You know what it is to me? It's kind of like winning a game because you cheated. Right? You didn't really win the game. So if we convince people of something and shut ourselves off to their questions and problems with it, it's kind of like winning the debate by cheating, and you didn't really win.
Yeah. I've actually had people they make essentially semantic arguments. Like they will say chemtrails are real because jet engine exhaust has chemicals in it and it leaves trails sometimes, and that must be a chemtrail because it's a chemical trail. Therefore, chemtrails are real. So it's almost like they're more interested in winning the argument by some kind of semantic thing than they are in actually discovering what's actually going on. It's almost like a kind of a contest or a game to try to decide who wins.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on with these 9/11 debates, and not to pick on you, but you're kind of unique to me as a debunker, because a lot of debunkers, if they were going to have me on a show like this or a podcast like this, the goal isn't really to have an intelligent discussion and come to truth and understanding. The goal is just to make the 9/11 truther look like an idiot.
Yeah, well, I would agree with that with a lot of the flat Earth debunking stuff. Yeah, I'm not comparing the two. I'm comparing the debunkers here. Like you see these flat Earth things, and they're just making fun of the flat Earthers all the time. And they actually do very well on YouTube. They have channels with quite a lot of views. But I don't know if there actually are that many 9/11 debunkers nowadays. I mean, do you know of anybody who does like 9/11 debunking talk shows or podcasts or anything like that? Because I'm not really familiar with any.
I guess if you asked me that a few years ago, I'd probably say, yeah, there's a whole bunch of them who have kind of died down a little bit. I mean, we had Popular Mechanics, we had the guy, what's his name, Ronald Wick, we had what's his name? There's a thing in the movement of this inability to let go of something when it's been demonstrated to be false. An example would be the Pentagon, right? We have the sense that a plane didn't hit the Pentagon because the hole is too small. And I mean, just look at the pictures. That's just a misleading picture. If you really look at the broad spectrum of the photos that are taken there, that gash is like 100 feet wide.
And that's very interesting. I was going to ask you specifically about that thing, because it's something that comes up a lot. It's like people say the hole in the Pentagon was too small. You hear this a lot. You hear it over and over from people who don't think that a plane hit the Pentagon. And then you show them the pictures of it, and you show them like the bits on either side where the wings hit the column, and they'll reject it. And it's kind of hard to know what to do with someone who, even when you're showing them something like that, you show them the actual plane overlaid with the hole, and you show that it could quite easily have fit through the hole with the ends of the wings obviously snapped off.
Yeah.
Do you talk to people who are like no plane hit the Pentagon type people, within the community?
Yeah, it's frustrating because they just don't listen to reason. They just cling to that belief like it's crazy. And here's another observation I have. The truthers want it both ways. They cite the testimony of Norman Mineta as evidence of a stand down of a plane approaching the Pentagon, but then they say there was no plane. So which is it? Right? I mean,
there's a famous conspiracy theory study, I think, that where people were asked about various conspiracy theories and asked which ones they believed. I can't remember who it was exactly, but say it was JFK. Like they said, like one theory is that JFK faked his own death and is still alive, and the other theory is that JFK was assassinated by the CIA. I think it was actually about somebody else, but it's the same basic thing. Like this person was, there was two theories about this person, one in which he was dead and one in which he was still alive. And they were asked how much they believed either of these theories. And they were about 90% for both theories, which means that they simultaneously believed it was highly plausible that he faked his death and highly plausible, like almost certain, that he was dead. So they kind of simultaneously believe someone. It was like Schrodinger's conspiracy theory. But yeah, you get people wanting to believe things because they fit the worldview, even if they don't fit each other. They could believe 10 different things, they don't have to fit together. But if each individually fits the worldview, then that one thing by itself becomes attractive to them. And it doesn't matter that it contradicts with other things in their belief system.
There are people, I'm not going to mention any names here, but there are people very high up in the 9/11 truth movement who still, I'm not talking about just your average Joe truther from down the block. I'm talking about some of the big names in the movement that you've heard of, who have still pushed this missile hit the Pentagon theory and have ostracized other people in the movement for not agreeing with that. And that's really reprehensible to me, especially since some of those people who have been ostracized for not believing that have more technical credentials and knowledge than the people who are ostracizing them.
Yeah. Well, I know like David Chandler is someone who does think a plane hit the Pentagon. He's the guy he's a former high school physics teacher who is famous in the 9/11 community because he brought it to NIST's attention that there was a segment of free fall in the collapse of World Trade Center Building 7, and then NIST changed their report to include that more detailed breakdown of the collapse to include the free fall segment. He's famous for that, but recently he spent a lot of time debunking the idea that no plane hit the Pentagon, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and he has been ostracized for that.
Yeah.
By the movement, and that to me is sad. It's really sad. I mean, you got a guy here who's basically a rock star in the 9/11 truth movement, and then they're ostracizing him for being truthful about the Pentagon. And some of the people that are responsible for that ostracizing of him, like I said, I'm not going to name their names, but they're pretty high up in the movement, and that's disturbing to me. That's really disturbing to me.
Yeah. I don't want to dig into that in terms of naming names, but like the lawyers committee, they recently published, I think, a YouTube video about Flight 93 and how they thought it was shot down. Flight 93 is the plane that crashed into the field in Shanksville, buried itself in the ground. But a lot of people think it also is very suspicious. To my mind, it's like a similar thing to the Pentagon. It looks odd because it was going so fast, and it looks like a small hole when it was just buried itself underground. But there's like a few things that people bring up, like they say, there was debris found miles away and things like that, and they say that means that it was probably shot down.
I haven't researched Flight 93, so I don't really make assertions about it. My suspicion is that it was shot down, but I don't say that with any conviction, really, because I haven't researched it.
Yeah. Well, the thing I always say to people, if you think it was shot down, look at other planes that have been shot down. When a plane gets shot down, it actually disintegrates in the air, and the debris is spread over many, many square miles. If you remember, a plane was shot down over the Ukraine, probably by the Russians, a few years ago. And there's lots of pictures of that, and you can see what happens when a plane actually gets shot down, and it doesn't look like a hole in the ground.
Let me ask you something about Shanksville, and I'm just asking. I don't know the answer. I'm not pretending I know the answer. It's not a rhetorical question. I'm looking for the answer. What do you make of this quote from Wally Miller that's often thrown around, the coroner, where he says he didn't see a single drop of blood, there were no bodies? I heard that he came out later and said that he was not misquoted, but he was misrepresented. I'm just curious, do you know anything about that?
Yeah, no, I don't know the specifics of it, but taken by itself, it doesn't sound that out of place to me, because you've got to remember what happened to the plane. Is it wasn't a typical plane crash. In a normal plane crash, the plane breaks up as it's hitting the ground at fairly low speed and just going like parallel to the ground, and so you get bodies and body parts scattered everywhere. What happened here is the plane went almost straight down at like a 50-degree angle or something like that, and it buried itself in the ground, and the fuselage was all compressed. Like stomping on a Coke can type thing, except horrible to think, like with people inside. And so like everything pretty much ended up underground. There weren't bodies being thrown free like you would think of in a small plane crash or a plane being shot down. There was a plane crash in Iran yesterday, and there's footage of that, and you see intact bodies, because essentially it wasn't flown into the ground at high speed. It just crashed. And when planes crash, it usually means that they're going below the aerodynamic speed, which for a plane is like about 150 miles an hour, something like that. Below that, they're going to stall and fall out of the sky. So either it's they have some kind of equipment failure which makes them stall and fall out of the sky, or they're hit by something and they break up in the sky. But either way, like it's a difference between a 500 mile per hour crash straight down and a 100 mile per hour crash is quite substantial. Like in the one, you get this thing where the plane just like penetrates into pretty much whatever it hits. and in the other, you get it just breaking up, and you will get intact bodies, just basically laying around. So there's a huge difference. So, his statement, this coroner's statement, is just what he said about what he saw when he first arrived at the scene. He essentially saw what other people saw and what you see in the pictures, which is a big hole in the ground. And the plane and the bodies were in that hole. So he would see all the body parts later, obviously, when they were dug out. And, probably wouldn't take that much digging to get to the first ones. But, the first day when he arrived there, that's what he saw.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the World Trade Center, Mick.
Sure.
I don't know much about Flight 93. I don't want to spend too much time on that. But here's something that's kind of interesting to me, and maybe you can give me your thoughts on this, your response. Everybody's heard about the interview with John Skilling in the Seattle Times, right, from 1993.
The one where he said that the buildings were designed to withstand the plane.
Yes.
Okay.
So in addition to that, I've seen multiple video clips from way before 9/11. There's a video from the late 70s or early 80s where a guy explained what would happen if a plane hit the Twin Towers and how it's an intense grid, kind of like a mosquito net.
Yeah.
And the plane is just a pencil puncturing that net. It really does nothing to the integrity of the structure. It's interesting to me that you're hearing this from multiple sources, like so long before 9/11. Kind of lends some credibility to it to me.
Well, it's true, though. I mean, it's very, very true. That's what happened. If you think to the videos of the planes hitting the World Trade Center, they just, from a distance, it almost looks like they melted into them. When you see it closer up, you see that the hole that they formed. But that's really what happened. The structure of the building did what it was supposed to do, what it was designed to do, which is withstand an impact like that. And it did.
John Skilling took the fire into account as well. The exact quote, I believe, is, "The biggest problem would be that all the fuel from the plane would dump into the building. If that happened, there would be a horrendous fire. A lot of people would be killed, but the building structure would still be there."
Yeah, so he was right about the first thing, in that the building it would withstand the impact. And that's a fairly straightforward thing to calculate, because you're just talking about an instantaneous redistribution of loads, so that when the planes hit the buildings, they swayed a bit from one side to the other. I think the top of the building, they calculated it probably moved like 9 inches or so, and it continued to sway a little bit. I believe that there are reports of people saying the building was swaying, but that was fine. That all worked. What didn't work was the fire ended up doing more damage than I guess they thought. Now,
I've seen a clip of Shyam Sundar saying the buildings wouldn't have collapsed from the planes and the fires, and the reason that they did was because the fireproofing was dislodged.
Yeah.
But I've never really come across any proof of that claim, that the fireproofing was dislodged, and I heard a pretty interesting argument against it, which was related to what you were talking about with the building swaying. And so the eyewitness testimony is that the building didn't kind of vibrate so much as it swayed all the way to one side and then swayed back the other way, rather slowly.
Well, that's what you would expect. So.
Right. Yeah,
if you're a few floors away, you're not going to get some kind of sudden movement of the entire tower. I wouldn't expect the whole building to suddenly shift to one side. That doesn't make any sense at all, because the building's so heavy, and the plane, is a tiny fraction of that amount. You think you'd have to imagine like a 200-pound window screen, and then you poke a pen through it by say throwing the pen at this 200-pound window screen. Yeah, it can penetrate it, but it's not going to make it move.
Right.
So, but you're asking about the dislodging of the fireproofing. Now, all steel frame buildings have to have fireproofing around the steel, otherwise they're extraordinarily vulnerable to fire, because a steel beam can heat up in a matter of minutes with a strong enough fire, and once it's heated up, it loses all its strength and fails. So they all have this fireproofing on.
So I've heard Richard Gage ask this question, and his response was unimpressive. But the question was, if steel can handle fire, why do we bother using fireproofing, Richard? And he didn't really have an answer for that. But my question then becomes, the fireproofing that's used on these buildings typically gives you about 2 to 3 hours, right?
Uh-huh.
So what about these buildings that have burned for like 17, 18, 20 hours? Surely the fireproofing is not a factor after the first few hours, and yet the building continues to burn like a torch for several more hours and didn't collapse.
Yeah. Usually what happens is the fire is moving from one part of the building to another. You can't really have a building, any fire burning in one spot for 5 hours.
Right. It's something like 20 minutes, I think.
You have a smaller fire. Yeah. Now, obviously that will raise questions when we get to World Trade Center Building 7. But, when you see these building fires, they typically don't burn for that long underneath one particular beam. They'll move from one spot to another. Now, World Trade Center 7, which is the one people like to focus on, you can ask, why did that one collapse when no other building in history has collapsed? Well, it's really kind of a set of extraordinary circumstances that caused it to collapse. Like, first of all, World Trade Center 1, the North Tower, basically collapsed 2 blocks away from it, took out most of the windows on the south side and did quite a chunk of damage to it and set a whole bunch of fires throughout the building.
Well, the NIST report on Building 7, the final report, states that neither the damage from World Trade Center 1 nor the fuel tanks in the bottom played any kind of significant role in the collapse.
Yeah, but the damage from World Trade Center 1 is what caused the fires. And it wasn't as if that was the only thing that was going on that day. There were significant challenges in fighting the fire by the firefighters. And of course, they pulled out of the thing. But
all right, I got to ask you about this, Nick. And before I do, I'm going to preface it by saying that I'm well aware that eyewitness testimony is probably the weakest form of evidence there is, but it is admissible in a court of law. What do you make of this claim from Willie Rodriguez and about 20 other eyewitnesses to an explosion in the basement of the North Tower before the plane hit? He gives quite a detailed account of that. And if you watch the footage from the Naudet Brothers documentary or any of the documentaries, look at the lobby in the North Tower. The marble walls are blown off. The windows, 3-inch thick glass is blown out. And I think the official explanation is that it's the jet fuel pouring down the elevator shafts. But I have a problem with that theory. And I didn't come up with this on my own. It's actually in that film, The New Pearl Harbor. But it makes sense to me, is that they're not taking into account the volumes involved there. The Twin Tower is like something like 1 million cubic yards or cubic feet or something like that. And the jet fuel, first of all, there's 10,000 gallons in each plane, right? Time of impact. Much of that is burned off initially in the fireball when it hits the tower. Some of it has to be sprayed around and start the fires.
Sure.
There's not really a whole lot of jet fuel left over to be pouring down 1,000 feet.
Well, how much do you think you would need?
Destroying the...
How much do you think you would need?
The film shows an in-scale graphic of what the volume of the jet fuel looks like next to the volume of the tower, and it's kind of staggering.
We're talking here about the explosion in the lobby. This is like another bit of 9/11 truth. Something that's commonly repeated, that there's this problem with why was there an explosion in the lobby, and the idea, I guess, is that there was perhaps, I don't know, I'm not sure what people are suggesting what happened. Like there was one of the pre-planted explosives went off too early or something like that, or was it?
No, the allegation is that, okay, when you do a controlled demolition, right? Not just the World Trade Center, but any building has a large redundancy factor. So you can't just do the final sequence right away and bring the building down. There's usually a series of preliminary explosions that's necessary to weaken the building. And the theory is that obviously they weren't going to detonate those all next to each other. So they spaced them out. I guess, I don't know if they miscalculated the time and that one went off too early, but that's the allegation about the explosions that happened before.
Does that make sense to you? Do you think that's a good theory?
It's worth consideration. There's some videos of controlled demolitions where they show that process.
But that was
They show you like
about an hour before the building actually collapsed, though. I mean, you don't see controlled demolitions where they do one explosion and then wait an hour and then bring the building down.
no. I mean, everybody knows that if these were controlled demolitions, they were obviously unique. And I mean, I don't think if World Trade Center 7 was a demolition, I think it would have been the biggest building ever demolished.
Let's see. Maybe we could do some like real time debunking here. Like, you hear about this thing like the jet fuel down the elevator shaft, and there wouldn't be enough jet fuel to cause an explosion to cause the damage in the lobby. So let's try to figure out how much jet fuel would be needed. It probably wouldn't be that difficult. Like, let's say we replace the jet fuel with dynamite. How many sticks of dynamite would it take to?
I think the difference between
damage?
Those is that dynamite just explodes. If jet fuel is pouring down, it's probably already on fire and already burning as it's coming down the elevator shaft.
Well,
so
it would be like essentially a fuel air explosion, where it would be atomized as it came down the shaft, and then ignited when it got to the bottom, and it would, I guess, like the flame front would come down the shaft all the way down, and there'd be a big explosion of the fuel at the bottom of the shaft. But let's say like some fuel got to the bottom and it was splashing around, so it's kind of all up in the air. It fell from the top, so it's obviously going to be on these tiny drops by the time it gets to the bottom. But let's just do a real simple energy calculation. I'm going to look up energy fuel air explosions. You know how cars work.
No, I don't know anything about cars.
you see.
No, I'm not joking. I really don't.
No, but you will have seen at least like the basic. A car runs on gasoline, right?
Yeah.
And the gasoline is burnt in the engine, and it pushes the cylinders around.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the way it pushes the cylinders, which rotates the crankshaft, which rotates the wheel, which rotates the main axle, is they basically use tiny little explosions. And they only use a really, really small amount of gasoline at once. Like each time the engine goes, each one of those little pops in a car engine is essentially an explosion. And a car engine can last a really, really long time on just one gallon of gasoline. You could actually sit and idle your engine for probably several hours on 1 gallon, depending on how efficient you are. And it's actually explosions going off constantly. Now, if you were to make essentially like a really, really big car cylinder and get the gasoline into this car cylinder in a way that it was kind of atomized in the same way it is like when it's sprayed into a car cylinder engine, you could think of the lift shaft of the World Trade Center as being like that car cylinder. And when this jet fuel, which is essentially very similar to gasoline, gets to the bottom of this cylinder, the lift shaft, and then gets ignited, you've got an explosion like a car cylinder, except a much bigger one. Instead of it being 5 cubic inches or something, it's just it's this huge, several cubic feet, hundreds of cubic feet. So you get this very, very large explosion from a relatively small amount of gasoline. Now, I don't know if does that sound like a bit of hand waving to you, or does it make any sense?
It's not that it's hand waving; it's just a little bit over my head.
Right. Have you ever heard of a flour explosion?
A what?
A flour explosion, like the flour that you make bread with?
No.
This is something that happens sometimes in mills. If the flour gets in the air and it's just kind of suspended in the air like all this dust, if there's a spark, it can actually explode. And sometimes you get these flour mills exploding just from flour in the air. It's if you get a substance that burns and you have it atomized, so it's kind of like a spray, like an aerosol spray in the air, and then you ignite it, it burns very, very rapidly. Essentially, it explodes. An explosion is just rapid combustion. So it doesn't actually take very much jet fuel to create a large explosion, especially if it's been atomized by, say, falling down a lift shaft. And the explosion itself actually further atomizes more stuff around it, and that's why you get these big fireball explosions. And you don't actually need that much. I think a gallon of jet fuel, I looked it up a while ago, but I can't find it right now, is equivalent to something like 5 sticks of dynamite. And you know how much damage you can do with like a few sticks of dynamite. So even if something as small as, say, 10 gallons of jet fuel made it to the bottom of that shaft, it could do an explosion equivalent to, say, 50 sticks of dynamite, like a crate of dynamite, essentially. Which I think you've seen enough movies to know that a crate of dynamite is enough to do quite a lot of damage.
Hey, Mick, if you have any sources or calculations on there, send them to me, please. I'd like to review it.
Yeah, so I just looked up, I just found a source. It's actually it says here, a single gallon of gasoline has the explosive energy of 83 sticks of dynamite.
Wow.
And this is actually from an article for farmers, like saying they have to be careful about empty containers. It's actually got gasoline in it still, like in the vapor form. A 250-gallon fuel tank that has 1 gallon of residual gasoline in it can if it vaporizes and then ignites, in that situation, it's the explosive energy of 83 sticks of dynamite. I will send you the link to that, but it's the Purdue News, and the article is titled "Farmers Should Use Extra Caution with Gasoline." So that's just one gallon. I thought it was far less than that. I'm quite surprised, actually. 83 sticks of dynamite.
Thank you for that information. This is what Willie Rodriguez said. This is curious to me. He said, I don't remember the exact words at the beginning of the quote, but he said he was, going about his business that day when he heard when there was an explosion so hard that it pushed him upwards. It came from the B2 level or the B3 level, and he thought that a generator had exploded. Mm-hmm. And when he went to verbalize that thought, he heard boom, the impact of the plane on the top. And he said, now 20 years working in the building, you know the difference between these two different events. One explosion from the bottom first that pushed me upwards, and then the plane on the top.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things you can talk about there. Like, when did he first tell that story?
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, if he told it even like 6 months afterwards, is he remembering it correctly? Like, when things happen, you can very easily confuse the order in which things happened. As you get older, I'm talking about myself here, not him. You recognize that your memory isn't perfect. So it could be that on the day he experienced explosions and noises and things like that. And obviously it was an extraordinarily stressful situation, and he didn't stop to think, oh, I wonder why it happened in that order, because he had no idea what was actually happening. He didn't like think, oh, that's the plane hitting the building, because he didn't know a plane was hitting the building. So how is he knowing in what order things actually happened in if he doesn't know what's actually going on? I think basically what you got there is someone who just doesn't remember the exact order of things happening, and then later thinks he remembered that, and he became convinced that that's what happened. I actually interviewed a couple of weeks ago one of the world's leading experts on false memories. Her name is Elizabeth Loftus.
I know that name. I have 2 degrees in psychology, so I think she came up at some point in my studies.
Yeah, no, she probably would, because she's been studying this type of thing for a long time, and she basically demonstrates just how easy it is for people to form false memories. People can have false memories implanted deliberately, but they can also just form on their own, and it's not just almost like not a false memory, like not remembering what order something happened in. Like, did I do this before I did this? You go on a vacation, you can't remember, like, did I go to this spot before I went to that spot? You don't always remember which order you did things in.
Yeah, even personally, I have memories of from my own past that I know are wrong.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I was like, I remember doing this and then doing this. And then when I look at the actual facts of the circumstances, well, I didn't even know that person at that time, so it couldn't have been, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I sometimes catch myself almost like falling into these false memories. Like I think, oh yeah, I can. No, I don't. That didn't actually happen. So things you can. But once you start, if you don't catch yourself, or if you don't have some way of verifying, what actually happened, then you get stuck with this false memory. And I think if that's probably what happened to this guy.
Maybe
it could be like another alternative is that he didn't actually hear the plane hit the building, and that what he heard first was the explosion. The fuel went down, and the second thing he heard was something like an elevator car falling from the top of the building and impacting the bottom of the building.
Let's talk about Larry Silverstein. Larry Silverstein acquired the World Trade Center. He already owned Building 7, but he acquired the towers, I think, something like 6 weeks before 9/11. And, a lot is made about this insurance policy that he took out. Mm-hmm. And to my mind, the World Trade Center was attacked in 1993, so it's not completely implausible that somebody would take out an insurance policy regarding terrorism, being that the building was already attacked once before. What puzzles me about that is not so much the insurance policy by itself. Why did he even acquire the towers to begin with for any reason? I mean, they were a disaster. They were more of a liability than they were a commodity at that point with all the asbestos. And
I don't know. Like, I'm not a real estate expert. You should ask Donald Trump. He was a New York real estate guy.
That means I have to talk to Donald Trump? No, thank you.
I think he acquired them because he thought he could make money. So obviously there was some path to making money that he had seen, his accountants had calculated would happen. Like he probably got them for a reasonably cheap price. They were being rented out, so there was like this income from them, and they did have retainable value, so they could be resold in the future. And they did have, like, obviously they had problems with asbestos and stuff like that, but that was being remediated. I mean, I don't know exactly what the numbers are.
They put the cost of the removal over $1 billion.
Who did?
I think the Port Authority.
Yeah. So, I mean, how much would the World Trade Center be worth now if it was still standing and had all the asbestos removed?
I don't know.
I mean, it probably is quite a valuable building, really. The World Trade Center one now is probably costs worth well over $1 billion. So I think when you buy a building, you're looking at the 30 to 50 year timeline of making money from it. You're not buying a building just thinking that it's going to increase in value. Either it's part of some great satanic plot, or his accountants figured out some way of making money from it. And yes,
which is kind of the same thing.
Glib, but I guess so. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say satanic there. It just popped out. It was just some I don't know, evil plot. Let's say that. But yeah, so I think. I don't think
that's okay. I had a guy in the 9/11 truth movement recently trying to convince me that 9/11 was a satanic cult operation, and that the numbers of all the flight numbers and everything are a satanic code for this. And I was like,
is that like? I mean, that's not typical. Obviously, like, most people are not like that, but you probably get a few people because. Like you say, the movement's kind of being, I don't know, kind of dying off to a degree. And so I wonder if that kind of like makes it filter down a little bit more to the more hardline people, the more eccentric people.
Yeah, one of my theories is that certain people are just so desperate to have people in the movement that agree with them that they open their arms to anybody, no matter how wacky their theories are.
Yeah.
It's my theory.
Hey, I wanted to ask you about something. I saw on the 9/11 Truth Action Project website, they have this section called Dr. T. Ruth, Mental Health and 9/11. And it's got a bunch of kind of interesting articles. there's an article, I think, Dr. T. Ruth on misinformation and disinformation. And it's actually kind of an interesting article because it's talking about how you need to have respect for other people and you need to be polite when discussing topics with them, and you don't want to get angry and start shouting at them and accusing them of being shills. I actually thought it was like a pretty good article in the general gist of it, because it's kind of like what I say. I tell people that you need to be respectful of people when you're talking to them, and you don't want to get angry, and that you got to be open-minded.
And you don't want to be condescending either.
Yeah, like you want to have a genuine discussion with them. It's interesting. This guy who wrote it, what was his name? Is he a doctor? Christopher Gruner. Do you know this person?
No, I don't.
Yeah, this is a mental health counselor. But
I've not explored that section of the website, to be honest with you.
Okay. Yeah.
But I probably will.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was a fairly prominent part of the website. Like if you go to 911tap.org, on the top there's like a little menu, and it says like about us, media, contact us, and then Dr. T. Ruth. So there's like 6 things on the top, and that's like right there in the middle of it. And the first thing I see, actually, I'm not even looking at that page, but the first thing on the 9/11 Truth homepage is psychological warfare. It seems like there's a lot of focus on psychology. Do you get that sense that people talk about that, or do you think it's still more about the physics than that?
I think it's still more about the physics. I don't come across too much talk about mental health and psychology in my travels, anyway.
Yeah, I saw I guess a YouTube video a while back, and it was basically diagnosing debunkers like myself as being mentally ill because we're unable to open our eyes to the reality of 9/11.
To be fair, we've been painted with that brush for years.
Yeah, but do you actually think it's true in the other direction, though?
Well, as a mental health professional or a former mental health professional, and as a person who has myself a schizophrenia spectrum disorder, there's definitely mental illness on both sides, and if you look for it, you'll find it. I mean, I try not to diagnose people in my head, but
yeah,
I've certainly come across plenty of people in the movement that I'm like, oh boy.
Yeah, well, you come across people in normal life who you think that, but I guess they stand out more. Like I remember going to a chemtrails conference a few years ago, and most of the people there are just like nice normal people who happen to believe in chemtrails, but there was also a few kind of kooky people there as well. So I think in any if you go to a football game, you're going to see some crazy people. I don't like the idea that some people have, like, of saying that just because someone's a 9/11 truther, that means they're a crazy person or that they're insane or mentally ill or something. I think the vast majority of people are just regular people who, in my mind, are just mistaken in their beliefs.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that in both directions. I don't think I'm crazy. I know I have a diagnosis, but I take my medication. I do very well. I don't have any symptoms really at this point.
Yeah, don't seem crazy to me.
The folks at Popular Mechanics might have a different take on it. But
well, what do you actually believe about 9/11 that you think other people might think is, I don't know, delusional? Do you have any extreme beliefs? What's the most extreme thing you actually personally believe, rather than just simply having questions about it?
Controlled demolition is as far down the rabbit hole as I go.
Do you think there was a controlled demolition?
I think there's a chance that there was a controlled demolition, a good chance.
Like, if you were to put your probability on a scale of, say, 0 to 100, where 100 is you're completely sure there was controlled demolition, where would you say you were at?
To be honest with you, Mick, it changes all the time. And what happens with me is I try to expose myself to as much information as I can on both sides of the debate, and I end up kind of flip-flopping. I'll see something or hear something or read something and go, that's it. It was a controlled demolition for sure. And then I'll see something else on the other side and go, wait, no, it wasn't. You can drive yourself a little nuts.
So do you feel like you're less believing, like, I don't know, like 2% less or something after talking to me, or has it not changed you at all?
Yeah, I mean, some of the responses you had to some of the questions I raised seemed pretty sound and reasonable. I don't know if I agree with everything you said, but
No, I wouldn't expect you to. Like, yeah, you can't just have like a 1 hour discussion and then have someone change their
yeah,
mind. That's not gonna work. But yeah, there's
right.
stuff you can talk about these things, and yes, a lot of them is kind of interpretation of things, though. Like yeah, that guy who
Yeah,
remembered an explosion before he thinks the plane hit the building. Yeah, that's not something. It's not something. It's very intangible in a way. You can't really get
yeah,
your
because
teeth into it.
it's eyewitness testimony, and it's not the best evidence. We know that.
Yeah,
But I don't want to discount it completely. Like I said, eyewitness testimony, it is admissible in a court of law, so there's some kind of credibility to eyewitness testimony.
yeah. But actually, Elizabeth Loftus, one of the things she talks about a lot is she actually goes to trials as usually an expert witness for the defense to explain how eyewitness testimony isn't as reliable as people think it is. And often people actually get released and get found not guilty because of her testimony, because the trial is based, the accusation is based upon eyewitness testimony only. And it's something like, this one person picks somebody out of a lineup and says, that's the guy. And that's all the evidence they have. And so she goes into the court and says it's very easy for these memories to be false. Or someone will say, I remember this happening. And someone else says they remember something else happening. And then she has to explain to the judge there's no way of knowing which one of these things is correct. And both these people could genuinely be remembering it honestly, but incorrectly, because the judge is thinking one of these people is lying. But actually, it's just both of them had bad memories.
Right. And
yes, so eyewitness testimony is memory. It's people like bringing their memory to a court and saying, this is what I remember. And so just because it's admissible doesn't mean it's actually any good.
that's true. It's true. I have something to say. About NIST too.
Sure, go ahead.
A lot of people think that the NIST report is bogus. I have certainly felt that way at times myself, but I do not think that somebody from the government came and took Shyam Sundar and John Gross, pulled them aside, said, listen, we blew up the World Trade Center and we need you to cover it up. I don't think that's what happened. I think when you work for any kind of agency and you do any of this kind of work, it goes without saying that you're not going to implicate your government or your agency or your people that you work for in anything wrong, any kind of wrongdoing ever. You know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying necessarily that these guys said, oh, it's a controlled demolition, but we better hush it up. I just think you don't even go there if you work for, I work for an agency that's been investigated for certain business practices and stuff like that. I'm not stupid. I know I'm not going to implicate them in some kind of wrongdoing if I want to keep my job. So, in general, I don't think there's this idea with conspiracy theories that there's this vast conspiracy that everybody's in on it and everybody's deceiving everybody else. And I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. I don't think you have to really be in on it to be kind of complicit in it. You're just doing your job. You're just trying to keep your job and not rock the boat.
But do you think, like, by the end of the investigation, do you think that everybody who was investigating it knew that it was a controlled demolition?
No.
Do you think anybody figured it out?
Maybe. I'm sure you've seen those video clips of David Chandler challenging the free fall. And I always kind of find it amusing, that part when Mr. Sundar is asked about free fall and he kind of trips over his own words for about 30 seconds before he says anything that makes any sense. And David Chandler says something like, whoa, that's the kind of response I get from a physics student when they haven't bothered to open the book. Well, it was kind of funny.
Do you think Shyam Sundar, the guy who led the NIST investigation, do you think he knew that it was controlled demolition?
Intuitively, maybe.
So you think he felt that it was, but he didn't know it?
I'm not sure, Mick, to be honest with you. It's hard to speculate about what's going on. And
you think he would have more evidence available than anybody. So what do architects and engineers know that he doesn't know?
Right. Well, it's really difficult to speculate about what's going on in somebody else's head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can be suspicious. I'm suspicious of him, but I don't have proof that he lied or proof that he fabricated anything. It's just a suspicion.
So do you think, let's say, the FBI agents who investigated 9/11, half of the FBI, at the cost of billions of dollars, was tasked with investigating 9/11 and tracking down the hijackers and everything and the sources of money and things like that? Do you think all those agents were fooled, or just a percentage of them were fooled?
I don't know anything about that part of the investigation. I haven't researched it. I don't know exactly what the FBI did, or
well,
I don't really want to comment, speculate on that.
Well, if you just assume, like, for a second that half the FBI was working for 2 years investigating 9/11, I mean, would you be comfortable saying that that was true?
I don't know. The first time I heard that is from you. So.
All right. Well, it's in the, I guess, all the accounts.
I'm not saying you're wrong.
No. Yeah. I guess how would you know that it's true? It's a good kind of a good a good point. But obviously, lots of people work at the FBI. All the people who work at the FBI would know roughly what people were working on. Like they would say, these teams were assigned to this, and there must have been people who thought they were investigating 9/11 who worked at the FBI. So I guess the point I'm trying to get at is, was the entire FBI complicit, or was there some kind of strange compartmentalization going on where there was this strange theater where they pretended to investigate? Don't know how many people were working at the FBI, but let's say it's like 10,000 or something, and 5,000 of them were working. Let's just look this up real quick. Let's not speculate when we can look things up. How many FBI field agents are there? There's 35,000 people working at the FBI. And they said about half the people who worked at the FBI were working on 9/11. It's probably actually more than that, because people would be rather, reluctant to work on anything else. So where's half of 35,000? 17,000 people were working on the investigation of 9/11. How would that work if it was a big government conspiracy and there were pre-planted explosives in the building and that all had to be covered up? If you got 17,000 people looking into this, isn't it kind of risky?
It is, and it's a valid question. I can't prove any of that to you, but what I can say is provide you an example. The Manhattan Project involved over 100,000 people, and it was kept very secret for quite a while.
It wasn't kept secret from the FBI investigation, though. There wasn't like a big investigation saying, why did this bomb go off? So let's say, like, the Hiroshima happened, and no one knew why it happened. And the FBI says, we've got to find out who dropped this atomic bomb. And they start looking into it. That's the kind of situation you're in after 9/11. Something big has happened. The FBI thinks they've got to try to figure out what it is. Now, the Manhattan Project with the atomic bomb development, the FBI's job is to protect the secrecy of that. It's not their job to investigate it. It's their job to protect the secrecy. And it's wartime. And everybody knows that it's top secret. It's not the same situation. Here we've got...
That's a good point, Nick.
We've got an actual investigation of something. Or we've got some kind of strange theater where 17,000 FBI agents are pretending to investigate. I just don't see how it could possibly work.
I see what you're saying. It's a good point. I would need to know more about the FBI investigation and who did what and who was exactly looking into what and what they found in terms of, because it's really complicated.
Yeah, I think there's an article on the FBI page on that. I mean, I'm going to look it up real quick. So what do FBI say about it? They say, our ensuing investigations of the attacks of 9/11, codenamed Pent Bomb, was our largest investigation ever. At the peak of the case, more than half our agents worked to identify the hijackers and their sponsors, and with other agencies to head off any possible future attacks. We followed more than 500,000 investigative leads, including several 100,000 tips from the public. The attack and the crash sites also represented the largest crime scene in FBI history. So half of all their agents were working on that.
Speaking of crime scenes, Nick, it's a federal offense to remove anything from a crime scene, even a matchbook. And yet, a lot of the evidence in Ground Zero was destroyed and shipped overseas, and there was something of an outcry from the engineering community about that.
Yeah, but
there were some statements.
There was, but not because it was a crime scene. They wanted to investigate to see exactly why the buildings collapsed the way that they collapsed. I don't think there was actually any outcry from anybody other than people who thought there was a controlled demolition about crime scene contamination. Because what was happening, everybody assumed that the buildings had collapsed because of the planes hitting them and there being a big fire. And the priority initially was try to find survivors in the wreckage. And to do that, they had to move a whole bunch of steel out of the way so they could get in there. I believe they were hopeful that they would find survivors for a few days afterwards. It quickly became apparent that they weren't going to. They did dig a few people out, the people stuck in the stairwell. But they didn't consider it to be a crime scene in the traditional sense of like somebody was murdered in their living room and there's blood splattered on the wall and there's footprints on the ground. The crime scene was in the cockpits of the planes. The crime was that these hijackers hijacked these planes and flew them into the buildings. That's what they considered the crime scene to actually be. You know, the FBI says that like the site is the crime scene, but that's like saying that an entire town is a crime scene because a murder occurred in the town. Yeah, they probably wouldn't say that. But it's not a good analogy.
It's the best analogy.
Yeah, but you should read the accounts of people who worked on the World Trade Center site. There's a good one by a guy called Douglas Friedman, who I interviewed on the podcast a while back. And he talks about what the priorities were when they were cleaning up the site. And the number one priority after they got done with rescue, the number one priority was recovery, which was recovery of human remains. And that's pretty much what everybody who was working on the site was really focusing on, was trying to recover all the human remains as quickly as possible so they could be given back to the families of the people. And the people who worked there got extremely emotional about it. And every time they discovered a new body after a while, they would start having these processions where they would put the remains in a wooden coffin and they would carry them out and salute them. But that's what was going on. They weren't trying to clean up the site to hide the steel or anything like that. They were removing the steel so they could remove the bodies. The steel wasn't.
Why did they ship it overseas and melt it down?
They didn't ship it overseas.
Preserve it at another.
They did preserve it. They took it. Most of it was taken to Fresh Kills landfill, and it sat there for quite a while.
Not most of it. A little bit of it.
A little bit was stored. It was for long term. But initially, like it was several weeks or months that it was there before it was moved away. Well, this is, I guess, details that we could actually look up. But this whole thing about the crime scene thing doesn't really make any sense to me. I mean, it makes sense to you because you think there might have been a crime of a controlled demolition. But everybody who was there on the day, all the people who were working there, thought that terrorists had hijacked planes and flown them into the buildings, which they had. And then they thought that the buildings had collapsed because of that. Yet no one even thought that the buildings had collapsed from explosives. So no one thought there was any reason to look for explosive residue or whatever they would do, or examine the steel for cutting and things like that.
Mm-hmm. You're familiar with Eric Lawyer, right? He's the founder of Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. He talks about the NFPA standards for the investigations of building failures. Yeah. The NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association. And it seems pretty clear from what he's talking about that the standard procedure wasn't followed. And even if even if there's no reason to think there's a controlled demolition, don't we typically follow our procedures anyway? Don't we do due process? Like, everybody knows that O.J. Simpson killed those people. We still had the trial.
Well, that's a little bit different, I would say, seeing as there weren't any eyewitnesses to what happened. Whereas everyone saw the planes fly into the buildings, and then the fires, and then the collapses. But yeah, the standard procedure for investigating fires has a consideration for investigating whether it was arson or not. But I think, again, in this case, from everyone's point of view, the causes of the fire were obvious. Planes flew into the building, planes full of fuel, and there was a big fuel air explosion, and fires started because planes flew into the building. So why would you need an investigation? But they did actually, because the guidelines give essentially leeway to people to decide when to follow the guidelines. So if it's not necessary, like if it's so obvious that it's not actually needed, like if someone actually saw somebody light the Christmas tree on fire and they have video of that's actually burning the house down, then they don't need to have an investigation to see if someone lit the Christmas tree on fire. And the same thing here. We saw what happened. Somebody flew planes into the buildings, and that's why they caught on fire. And the fires burnt very intensely for an hour, and the buildings collapsed. That's what happened. Maybe in addition to that, there were some explosives, but no one thought that at the time.
I wouldn't say no one thought that.
Did you think that?
A lot of people didn't think that, but
you didn't think that.
I mean, I did. Well, I know that's not that I thought it was explosive. I just thought it was really peculiar on that day, and I kind of just dismissed my concerns for a while. But I mean, there's plenty of accounts of people on that day saying, "Oh, it looks like a controlled demolition. Oh, it looks like a implosion. Oh, it looks like a demolition crew came here." And if you look at the news clips, plenty of people said that. Even some of the experts. Van Romero said that originally. He retracted his statement, but he said that there's footage at Ground Zero of firefighters and other people, first responders, saying, "Oh, I think there was a bomb there." So I wouldn't say nobody thought that.
Yeah, no, somebody probably certainly did, I'm sure. But what I'm talking about is the people who made the decision or didn't make a decision to treat the scene as a crime scene. Like, who is going to make that decision? I guess it would be the head of the fire department at the time, whoever was there. Their priorities right then were rescuing people. They probably didn't even stop to think, like, is there the possibility that this building collapsed because there were explosives planted on the same floors that the plane hit and where the fires were? Yeah, even just saying it seems a little bit ridiculous. Like that there were bombs planted on the same floors that the planes hit.
I don't think that's the allegation.
Well, that's where the collapse started.
Yes. I think the allegation, if you watch, not that you're going to watch it, but if you watch that new Pearl Harbor film that I've mentioned, the allegation is that the core was taken out first, which means the explosives didn't necessarily have to be on the same floors as the plane. They were probably lower than that. Took the core out first. And I saw a video the other day of somebody from FEMA. Was it Gene Corley, maybe? Somebody from FEMA. I think it was Gene Corley, but maybe not. Showing that the antenna began to fall first before the rest of the building. And he said, the FEMA guy said, this is an indication that the core collapsed first.
Yeah, I think I've seen that. I mean, that's been knocking around for a long time, the idea that the core collapsed first. But, again, there's lots of people have looked into the collapse of the World Trade Center. There's been like a number of studies done as to, why it collapsed. And it's not hugely complicated in terms of like the basic physics. What's complicated is knowing exactly what order things happened, because we don't know exactly what columns failed first. So we're never going to know. But the physics behind the collapse aren't hugely difficult in my mind. Like once it started to collapse, there was no way of stopping it. And the combination of the damage and the fire seems sufficient to cause the original collapse.
Again, I'm going to make reference to the new Pearl Harbor film again. There's an interesting argument about that in there, and maybe you can tell me how accurate their depiction of the official explanation is, because maybe they have it wrong. But what they're saying is that the explanation is that the trusses sagged, and and pulled the exterior columns inward, and you do see that inward bowing of the columns before the collapse. And the theory there that the film is espousing is that the trusses, if they're so weak by fire that they're collapsing under their own weight, how do they have the strength to break the exterior column?
Well, they're pulling the columns.
They
pull the columns. I actually do an experiment. It's on my YouTube channel where I take a chain and I string it between two columns. So it acts like a floor truss, like the trusses are the metal structure underneath the concrete floors. It's kind of a zigzag. Yep, you can look up trusses online if people want to know what a truss looks like. Now, a truss is a rigid structure. So when it's there in place, it's between the columns in the middle and the columns on the outside. So it's providing rigidity between the inside and the outside. So it gives the whole structure some strength. Now, if you heat up a truss so it becomes softer and starts to sag, instead of providing that strength and that resistance, it actually starts to pull inwards by its own weight. Now, you ask how strong it is, it's going to be relevant. If it hasn't broken, it's as strong as a rope is strong. A rope doesn't provide any strength in terms of resisting pushing forces. But if you take say 100-foot long rope, or even better, a 50-foot long chain with very thick links, and you hook one end to one wall and hold one end, and then try to pull that chain straight, you won't be able to do it, because chains sag and they pull inwards because they're sagging. So what's happened is you've kind of taken this truss, which is a rigid structure, and by heating it up, you make it into a soft structure, kind of like a rope or a chain. And so it starts to sag and it starts to pull in from the sides, just like a loose chain would if you put it between two hooks. And because it starts out perfectly horizontal, it creates a huge amount of pulling force, because you know how much force it would take to pull a chain perfectly straight, like a really heavy chain that's quite long. So it pulls in the walls from the outside. And that's what you see. That's what you see in the video. You see the walls being gradually pulled in, and then eventually there's kind of a sudden inward pull as they give way. And then once the outside walls are no longer supporting anything, the load gets transferred inside the building, and there isn't enough remaining capacity amongst the remaining columns. And so some of the core columns fail and the building collapses.
Interesting. I think I know what you're going to say to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What do you make of the pulverization of all the contents of the buildings? And to my mind, you got two 110-story office buildings. There should have been thousands and thousands of filing cabinets, computers, desks, chairs, and I've heard a lot of different testimony of people at Ground Zero that said, man, it was just dust and metal. Yeah. You don't find a desk, you don't find a chair, you don't find a telephone, a computer. The biggest piece of a telephone I found was half the keypad, and it was this big. Yeah. I've heard this from a lot of different people. What do you make of that?
Look, have you ever seen those videos on YouTube where they take an industrial grinder and they toss things into it?
No, I've not seen that. Well,
check them out. Kind of interesting. But they'll take things like there's grinders that you can toss things into and it'll grind up a car. There's smaller grinders, like you're a paper shredder. You probably have paper shredders at the office that you stick in some sheets of paper, and these teeth kind of go crunch, 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 and they grind through it. What happened with the World Trade Centers collapsing was that as things fell, obviously they get faster. By the time most of the steel reached the ground, it was going between 50 and 100 miles an hour, and there was a lot of it all packed into this one place. And it wasn't just like big beams. There was small bits of steel from the trusses being mangled together, and there was all kinds of other heavy bits of steel and machinery and stuff. Very, very rapidly coming down in this very small area. And essentially it acted like a giant grinder, except a very, very rapid one. It was just like almost an instant pulverization of everything.
There's an engineer, Richard Heumann. You might have heard of him. He was the chief electrical engineer for the Twin Towers, actually. And he talked about these enormous transformers that were on multiple floors that weighed tens of tons, and they were never found. They were never completely eradicated. Do you think they could have been grinded the way you're describing?
Yeah. I mean, a transformer is just a bunch of wire wrapped around a core. So it's unless it had a solid steel core of a specific shape, which it would probably get stripped away. Have you ever been to I'm sure you have. You've been to the Memorial Museum?
No, I won't go there.
Okay.
I don't like the 9/11 museum, and it's not because of conspiracy theories. It's
No,
because
I understand.
I'm a New Yorker, and they basically treat Ground Zero like it's Disneyland, like it's an attraction, and I take exception to that.
I wouldn't say that. It's pretty respectful, and there's one section especially. Well, there's a number of sections that were of increased seriousness. Like there's one section where they won't let you take any cameras, and then there's another one, which is where they show the names of all the people who lost their lives there, and little.
I mean, there's a gift shop where they sell toy fire trucks.
There is, yeah, but it's. They didn't originally want to have a gift shop when they did the museum because they thought it would be disrespectful. But people asked for a gift shop because they wanted to have something to remember it by. And you could argue that it's a bit tacky, but people wanted a memorial that they could take away. I bought things in the gift shop. I bought some books.
We have a really tiny 9/11 museum here on Staten Island, actually.
Does it have a gift shop?
No. It's just it's like basically one room.
Okay.
It's in a place called Snug Harbor, which is a cultural center that used to be lodging for sailors. And they have all kinds of different buildings there. There's a 9/11 memorial. We have a memorial near the Staten Island Ferry as well. It's very interesting, actually. It shows all the faces of the people that were killed from Staten Island, and they're done like in stone on the memorial.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense.
Yeah, it's what the Memorial Museum is pretty intense, especially the actual memorial part of it, which is where they memorialize the people. It's very emotional. Very emotional. I mean, first time I went there, I had a few tears, and you see, they have boxes of tissues around it because everyone who goes in there starts crying.
Yeah.
So it's it's not making light of the situation. I mean, I understand you not liking the gift shop, but it's and I wouldn't say go there because it's up to you. But but my point really was that they have some stuff from the World Trade Center that survived the collapse. Like they have one of the engines for the elevators, things like that, which you reminded me of. You said the transformer, and I think an engine elevator would be a similar type of thing, and that did survive. And they have lots of things like effects of people and some office contents, but obviously not very much. But getting back to the original point, I think there wasn't a disintegration of things by explosives. So that doesn't even make any sense. Like, why would the office contents be disintegrated by explosives? Because the office contents aren't holding up the walls. What would be the point of blowing up the desks? What would be the point of blowing up the telephones? And if something is far enough away from an explosion, it's going to maintain its shape. These things were all just crushed by the falling building. They weren't blown up by explosives. Doesn't mean there weren't explosives, but it's not evidence for explosives.
It occurs to me that we've been talking for about 2 hours now. We still haven't even mentioned the Halsey report. Yeah.
What do you think about the Halsey report? I mean, you just briefly, one of the things you mentioned when you emailed me was that you thought I had some good questions about the Halsey report, and you were hoping that you'd get some answers.
Yeah. I'm particularly disturbed by the point you made about the penthouse. How it just kind of drops, and it doesn't show us any of the girder sequences or what's happening with that. It just kind of disappears.
Yeah, it's because it's not actually a simulation, that thing. And that's actually being confirmed by people within Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Like somebody asked somebody, and they got back to me and they said, yeah, it's just, what did they describe it as? A simple gravity rotational visualizational model to look at the result. It wasn't the actual simulation. They didn't actually do a simulation of the penthouse collapsing. They just did these simulations where they removed columns and found out what the stress would be on other columns.
Do you think the Halsey report is simply mistaken and incorrect, or do you think it's a fraud?
I think it is. a half good faith effort into looking into it. I feel like Halsey was predisposed to think that it was controlled demolition. He seemed very suspicious from the start, and he was right. Back when he started it, like whatever 4 years ago or something, he was talking about things that seemed suspicious, like the FBI having an office there, and then silly things like they were accounting offices so there wouldn't be enough paper to burn. Stuff like that. That if he's already thinking along those lines, it seems like he already had not his mind made up, but he had suspicions. And the report itself and the study, I think, were mostly done by one of the graduate students. If you look at the task breakdown as to who did what, there's two graduate students. I think they were both from China. One of them now works in a local government as a civil engineer, and the other one has gone back to China. I can't remember which one is which, but one of them did the simulations, and I think possibly did the some of the slides as well and the visualizations and things like that. So it's just this one graduate student who had no experience whatsoever doing this type of thing before and had to figure all this stuff out, doing this thing at the direction of Professor Halsey, of course. But you can tell from the results that it's nowhere near as comprehensive a simulation as the NIST simulation. You can say all you like about the NIST simulation, but at least they actually simulated girders moving. Sure, there are problems with it, but it's a lot better than what Halsey did, or what Halsey's graduate student did.
I don't know. I'm looking at two models now, and I'm looking at two models, and neither one of them, to me, is mirroring that collapse.
Yeah, but Halsey's only mirrors the collapse because he set it up to mirror the collapse. He said, what would happen if we did something that would essentially give the results that we see, and what he did was ridiculous. He cut columns underneath the penthouse and had it settle into the building, and then he cut all the columns over multiple floors simultaneously, which is something there was no evidence for whatsoever. And like I say, you can criticize NIST for it. You can criticize NIST simulation, but NIST simulations actually is a lot better than Halsey's thing. And just because Halsey's crappy simulation looks better, it doesn't mean it actually is better.
Right.
Anyway, this is probably something we'd probably need a lot more time to get into, and we have that time now. But I would, I would like to talk about it if you.
Sure. I want to respect your time, and but thank you for talking with me today, Mick.
Yeah, well, thank you for first of all for contacting me, and secondly for talking to me. And I appreciate your position. I know you have a lot of respect for the victims of 9/11, and you have concerns. And I would hope that those concerns can be resolved one way or the other. I'd be fine with another investigation, but I know it's not going to happen just because there isn't the justification for it. So I guess we'll see where the 9/11 truth movement goes over the next few years. Yeah,
I'm going to pay a lot of attention to Halsey and his response to his critics, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what everybody else. Because you got to admit, to be fair, we do have to hear his response.
Oh yeah, no, I want to hear his response. That's I will be very, very interested to see what he has to say about it.
You can understand if it seems a little peculiar to me that a forensic structural engineer didn't understand the NIST model, but you do. It seems kind of crazy, but
I think there was aspects of it he didn't understand. Like he got a bit confused about the thing with them only modeling half the building and things like that. So it will be very interesting to see how he does actually respond to the criticism he's got on this report.
Yeah, let's see. And maybe we can talk again after we hear something from Halsey.
Indeed, yeah. All right, well, I'm definitely going to go now. So thank you very much.
All right, Mick, good night.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.